Let me think about attention for a moment, not as some abstract virtue, but as what it actually is. The most finite resource you possess. You have a limited number of hours in a day, a limited number of years in a life, and within that scarcity sits an even smaller reservoir, your focus, your emotional energy, the part of you that notices and cares. This is your currency, and like any currency, its value depends entirely on how selectively you spend it. Now consider what happens when you hand that currency to someone who has already told you, through their actions, that they don't want it. Maybe it's the friend who never returns your calls unless they need something. Maybe it's the family member who remembers your name only when convenient. Maybe it's the colleague who looks past you in every meeting, as if your ideas arrive already disqualified. Whoever they are, here is the uncomfortable truth. Their indifference is not a mystery for you to solve. It is information. It is, in fact, one of the clearest signals another human being can send you, and most people spend years refusing to receive it. Why? Because we've been conditioned to believe that persistence is always a virtue. We're told that if we just try a little harder, love a little louder, prove ourselves a little more thoroughly, the cold will eventually turn to warmth. This is a seductive lie, and it is precisely the kind of lie that keeps intelligent, capable people trapped in cycles of quiet humiliation. The philosopher who understands power understands this first. Cannot negotiate with someone who has already left the table. Every additional attempt you make isn't devotion. It's a donation, and you're making it to someone who has shown you plainly that the investment won't be returned. Here is where the deeper psychological pattern reveals itself. Attention-seeking is not weakness in the way we're taught to think of weakness, as laziness or fragility. It's something more specific. It's misallocation. It's a brilliant resource aimed in the wrong direction. Think about the sheer creative and emotional force we pour into being noticed by people who have made their disinterest obvious. The texts we rewrite 4 times before sending. Achievements we quietly hope someone specific will hear about. The conversations we replay at night, searching for the sentence that might have made them finally see us. All of that is attention, your most valuable currency, spent on an account that yields nothing. And so the discipline required here is not indifference to people in general. It is precision about where your regard goes. This is not coldness of heart. It is intelligence of allocation. When you begin withdrawing your attention from those who offer none in return, something remarkable happens. You don't become bitter, you become efficient. You start to notice how much lighter you feel without the constant, low-grade calculation of, will they respond this time? You start to see clearly, often for the first time, who has actually been standing there all along. The people who answer, who show up, who remember. These people were always there. You simply couldn't see them because your gaze was fixed elsewhere, on the one person or the one room that offered you nothing. This is the real power move, and it is quieter than most people expect power to be. It doesn't look like confrontation. It doesn't look like a dramatic exit or a clever comeback. It looks like turning your face calmly towards something that deserves it. It looks like closing your phone instead of composing one more message. It looks like walking into a room and greeting the people who greet you back. Small, unremarkable, and devastatingly effective over time because attention compounds. Wherever you place it consistently, it grows. Relationships deepen, skills sharpen, reputations solidify. Wherever you waste it, nothing grows at all. It simply evaporates, along with a piece of your own dignity each time. So before you spend another ounce of yourself chasing someone who has already made their choice clear, ask yourself a simple question. If this were a financial investment, would you keep pouring money into an account that has never once paid you back? You wouldn't. You'd call it what it is, a loss, and you'd walk away. Do the same with your attention. It is not cruelty to withdraw it. It is the beginning of wisdom. Reclaim your currency. Spend it only where it is met in kind. That single shift, small, deliberate, unglamorous, is where every form of self-respect actually begins. Now let's turn to something even more insidious than misallocated attention, the game itself. Because chasing validation from someone who has made their indifference clear isn't just a waste of resources. It's a contest with no possible victory, structured in a way that guarantees your loss before you've even taken the first step. Think about the mechanics of it. When you pursue someone's approval, a parent, a lover, a boss, a friend who has grown cold, you are implicitly accepting a hierarchy. You are saying, whether you realize it or not, your opinion of me matters more than my opinion of myself. And once that hierarchy is established, every subsequent move you make is a move made from below. You laugh a little too readily at their jokes. You agree a little too quickly with their opinions. You accomplish something significant and immediately wonder whether they noticed, whether they approve, whether this finally will be the thing that closes the distance. This is not connection. This is servitude dressed up as devotion. Here's what makes it so dangerous. The harder you chase, the further the target recedes. This isn't poetic exaggeration, it's psychological law. Human beings are drawn to what withholds itself and repelled by what offers itself too freely. The moment someone senses that your sense of worth depends on their attention, they gain, often without even trying, a kind of quiet power over you. They don't need to do anything to maintain it. Your own eagerness does the work for them. You've handed them leverage simply by revealing how much their indifference costs you. This is why the ancients, and later the great strategists of power, understood something that modern sentimentality tends to obscure. Neediness is not endearing, it is repellent. Not because need itself is shameful. We are, all of us, need of connection, but because visible, desperate need signals an absence of internal foundation. And nothing makes a person more interesting to pursue and less interesting to actually value someone who has clearly already decided they cannot live without your approval. You've told them, without a word, that you have no other source of worth to draw from. Why would they invest in someone who has already surrendered? Now, notice the trap within the trap. The person chasing tells themselves a story to make the pursuit feel noble. I'm not desperate, they say. I'm just persistent. I'm loyal. I don't give up on people. This is one of the most effective forms of self-deception available to the human mind because it borrows the language of virtue to disguise what is actually happening, a slow erosion of self-respect, one unreturned effort at a time. Persistence is admirable when it's aimed at a goal that responds to effort, a craft, a skill, a worthy relationship built on mutual regard. Persistence aimed at a closed door is not virtue, it is denial. So what does the alternative look like? Not coldness, not calculated withdrawal as a manipulative tactic to win them back, which is simply the same game wearing a more sophisticated mask. The real alternative is something quieter and far more powerful. Genuine indifference to outcomes you cannot control. You stop performing for the audience that won't applaud. You stop revising yourself in hopes of becoming someone they'll finally notice. And in doing so, you discover something almost every serious thinker on power and psychology has pointed to in one form or another, that the person who does not need the room's approval is the only person who ever truly commands it. This is not accidental. When you release the need to be chosen by someone who has shown no inclination to choose you, you stop broadcasting weakness. Your energy changes. Your posture changes. And ironically, this is often the exact moment such people circle back. Not because you did anything to summon them, but because the scarcity you now represent is the very thing that made them withhold their attention in the first place. Here's the deeper point, the one worth remembering long after this speech ends. Whether they come back or not should no longer be the measure of your success. Measure of your success is that you stopped playing a game engineered for your defeat, because that's what chasing indifferent people always is, a rigged contest. The rules were never in your favor, and no amount of effort, charm, or self-sacrifice was ever going to change that. The only winning move, as it so often is, was to stop playing. So ask yourself, honestly, whose approval have you been chasing that was never going to be given? And what might your life look like the day you finally stopped running after it? Let's move now to a question that sounds simple, but that most people never actually answer for themselves. What makes a relationship real? Not comfortable, not familiar, not long-standing, real. Because we tend to confuse duration with depth, history with health. We stay loyal to connections simply because they're old, as if time alone were evidence of value. Time proves nothing. The only true measure of any relationship, friendship, family, romance, alliance, is whether it moves in both directions. Reciprocity is not a nicety. It is the entire architecture of connection. Strip away the sentiment, the shared history, the comfortable habit of each other's company, and what you're left with is a simple mechanical question. Does energy flow both ways? Do you show up for them, and do they show up for you? Do you extend effort, and is effort extended back? When the answer is yes, you have something worth protecting. When the answer is no, you don't have a relationship at all. You have an assignment. A one-sided labor you've taken on and mistaken for connection. This is worth sitting with because most people never examine their relationships this closely. They simply accumulate them. Friends from childhood, family by obligation, colleagues by proximity, and assume that the accumulation itself constitutes a life well connected. But an unexamined relationship is exactly like an unexamined investment. You have no idea whether it's actually paying dividends or slowly draining you because you've never once stopped to check the ledger. And here is where discipline separates the psychologically mature from the perpetually depleted. A mature person conducts an honest audit, not out of cynicism, not to reduce every human bond to a cold transaction, but because they understand a fundamental truth. Love, respect, and loyalty are not defined by intention. They are defined by demonstration. A person who claims to value you, but is never actually present when it matters, has told you, through pattern rather than words, exactly where you stand. And patterns, unlike promises, do not lie. This is precisely why ignoring those who ignore you isn't coldness. It's accounting. It's simply refusing to keep investing in a ledger that never balances. Think about what you actually do when you continue pouring effort into someone who offers none in return. You are, in effect, subsidizing their comfort at the direct expense of your own. You remember their birthday? They forget yours. Check in during their hard seasons? They vanish during yours. You make room in your life for their priorities? Your priorities are, at best, an afterthought in theirs. This is not friendship. This is a subsidy. And subsidies, by definition, cannot continue indefinitely without bankrupting the one who provides them. Now, the philosophical shift required here is subtle but total. Most people believe that redirecting energy away from a one-sided relationship is an act of anger, a punishment, a withdrawal meant to hurt the other person into changing. This is a misunderstanding of the entire principle. It's not punishment, it's alignment. You are simply bringing your external behavior into agreement with an internal truth that's been visible for some time. You're not closing a door out of spite. You're closing it because it was never truly open on the other side. And once you begin living by this principle, something clarifying happens. Your circle doesn't necessarily shrink, it sharpens. You begin to notice, often with some surprise, how many people in your life have been quietly reciprocal all along, waiting patiently in the background while your attention was consumed elsewhere by people who gave nothing back. These are the relationships worth building empires on, not because they're perfect, not because they're free of friction, but because they pass the only test that actually matters. When you reach out, something reaches back. This is the deeper philosophy beneath the entire idea of ignoring those who ignore you. It isn't really about the people who dismiss you at all. It's about redirecting your finite capacity for connection toward the people who have already proven, through action rather than word, that they're standing on the other side of the exchange. Loyalty misplaced is not virtue. It's self-neglect wearing the mask of virtue. And the sooner you can tell the difference, the sooner your relationships stop draining you and start actually sustaining you. So take an honest inventory. Look at where your loyalty flows and ask which of it flows back. Wherever it doesn't, you already have your answer. Now have the courage to act on it. It's a peculiar kind of pressure most of us grow up under. The belief that walking away is somehow a failure, that silence, distance, disengagement are signs of weakness, of giving up, of not caring enough to fight. We're taught to equate love with persistence and dignity with proximity, as if staying close to someone, no matter how they treat us, is proof of our own goodness. I want to challenge that belief directly, because it may be one of the more costly misunderstandings a person can carry through life. Silence is not always defeat. In fact, in the right circumstances, silence is one of the most sophisticated instruments of self-respect available to a human being. Consider what it actually requires. It requires you to withhold a reaction the other person may be expecting, even hoping for. It requires you to sit with the discomfort of unresolved tension without rushing to smooth it over. It requires restraint in a moment when every emotional impulse in you is screaming to explain yourself, to defend your worth, demand acknowledgement. That restraint is not weakness. It is, in fact, one of the harder disciplines a person can practice, precisely because it offers no immediate reward, no applause, no vindication. Just the quiet, private knowledge that you did not beg. Think about what begging actually communicates. Whenever you chase, explain, over-apologize, or perform for someone who has already withdrawn their regard, you are sending an unmistakable message: I do not trust my own worth to stand without your confirmation of it. This is the psychological trap hidden inside every desperate attempt to be understood by someone who has already closed themselves off. You believe you're proving your value. In reality, you're proving the opposite. That your sense of value is so fragile, it requires their validation to remain intact. Now compare that to the person who simply walks away. Not with cruelty, not with a dramatic speech designed to wound, just a quiet exit, offered without explanation, because none is owed. This person is communicating something entirely different, and it is communicated more powerfully through absence than it ever could be through words. I know precisely what I am worth, and I will not diminish myself by pleading for a seat at a table that has already made clear I am not welcome there. This is not bitterness. Bitterness is loud. It seeks an audience, seeks acknowledgement of its grievance, seeks the other person's discomfort as a kind of proof. What we're discussing here is different in kind, not just in degree. It is composed. It requires no audience because it isn't performing for anyone. It is simply an internal recalibration made visible through behavior rather than declaration. And there is something almost unsettling, in the best sense, about a person who can disengage without spectacle. It suggests a wellspring of self-worth that doesn't require external maintenance. That kind of composure is rare, and it is, whether we like to admit it or not, one of the most quietly commanding qualities a person can possess. There's a deeper principle at work here too, one that touches on how humans actually process value. We are drawn to what respects itself. A person who tolerates poor treatment in the name of loyalty, patience, or hope teaches everyone around them, consciously or not, that their boundaries are negotiable, that their dignity has no floor. But a person who withdraws cleanly when they are not valued teaches the opposite lesson, and they teach it far more effectively through action than any amount of confrontation ever could. Words can be argued with. Silence cannot. There's nothing to negotiate with an empty chair. I want to be precise here, because this idea is easily misunderstood as encouragement toward coldness or emotional avoidance. It is not that. Silence as self-respect is not about shutting people out reflexively or refusing connection out of fear. It is a specific, deliberate response reserved for situations where you've already been shown, clearly and repeatedly, your presence isn't valued. In those moments, and only in those moments, walking away isn't running from something. It's walking towards something, toward a version of yourself that no longer requires anyone else's permission to feel whole. So the next time you feel that old, familiar urge to explain yourself to someone who has already made their disinterest plain, pause. Consider what your silence might say instead. Not everyone deserves your voice, but everyone, always, deserves your dignity. Starting with you, let's talk now about something that operates beneath the surface of nearly every relationship you've ever had. Something so quiet you may never have named it directly. though you felt its effects your entire life. People treat you the way you teach them to. Not through lectures, not through explicit demands, through what you tolerate. Every time you accept less than you deserve without response, you are, in effect, issuing an instruction. And human beings, whether they realize it consciously or not, are remarkably fast learners when it comes to exploiting the boundaries we fail to enforce. Consider how this plays out in practice. Someone cancels on you repeatedly, and you say nothing. Show up anyway, remain warm and available, regardless. What have you communicated? Not patience, as you might like to believe. You've communicated that your time carries no real cost to them. Someone speaks to you dismissively, and you laugh it off to keep the peace. What have you taught them? That dismissiveness toward you produces no consequence, and therefore requires no restraint. This is not a moral failing on your part. It's simply how behavior gets reinforced. We are, all of us, running a kind of ongoing experiment in every relationship we maintain, whether we intend to or not, and the results of that experiment are written into how people continue to treat us over time. Here is the deeper, more uncomfortable truth beneath this principle. People do not treat you according to your worth. They treat you according to what you've demonstrated you'll accept. Worth is invisible until it's enforced. You can possess extraordinary value as a friend, a partner, colleague, and still be treated as disposable simply because you never once demonstrated that disposability carries a cost. This is why some of the most capable, generous, deeply worthy people you'll ever meet are also, paradoxically, the most quietly mistreated. Their goodness became, in the hands of the wrong people, an assumption of infinite availability. And infinite availability, whether we like this fact or not, is rarely respected. It's simply consumed. This is where the earlier principles converge into something actionable. When you stop chasing those who ignore you, when you release your need for approval from the indifferent, when you audit your relationships for genuine reciprocity, when you allow silence to stand in for the pleading you once offered, what you are actually doing, beneath all of it, is issuing a new instruction. You are retraining the people around you, not through confrontation, but through consistency. You are showing them, with your behavior rather than your words, that your presence has a price, and that price is mutual regard. This is not manipulation. It is the most basic form of self-respect translated into action, because self-respect that exists only internally, that never shapes how you actually let people treat you, is not yet real. Its aspiration becomes real the moment it costs someone something to disregard you. There's a particular phrase worth holding on to here: match the energy. It sounds simple, almost casual, but it contains an entire philosophy of boundary setting within it. To match energy means you extend exactly what is extended to you. No more, out of hope, no less, out of spite. If someone reaches out consistently, you reach back. If someone vanishes for months and resurfaces only when convenient, you no longer front-load your enthusiasm to compensate for their absence. This single recalibration, giving people exactly what they give you, rather than what you wish they'd give you, changes the entire dynamic of a relationship, often more quickly than any conversation about it ever could. People feel the shift before they can articulate it. And many of them, faced for the first time with the actual cost of their neglect, begin to close the gap themselves. Some won't. And this is important to say plainly. This principle is not a manipulation tactic designed to lure people back into better behavior. Some people, once you stop overextending yourself, will simply drift further away, revealing that your effort was the only thing holding the relationship together in the first place. This is not a loss. This is clarity, arriving finally, after having been obscured for years by your own willingness to compensate for what they never gave. What you tolerate becomes your curriculum, and everyone around you is, whether they know it or not, enrolled as your student.
Teach them well.
Teach them that your regard is not unconditional, that your presence is not owed to indifference, that mutuality is the price of admission into your life. This isn't cruelty. It's the quiet architecture beneath every relationship worth having. So ask yourself, plainly, what have you been teaching people to do to you? And what would change, starting today, if you began teaching something different? Let's end where we began, but with the full weight of everything we've covered now behind us. Because underneath every point I've made tonight, the attention you spend, the validation you chase, the relationships you audit, the silence you choose, the standards you teach, there is one single unifying force at work: focus. Where you place it, what you protect it from, and ultimately, what kind of life it builds, one deposit at a time. I want you to think about focus not as a mental exercise, but as something closer to physical law. Energy directed at one thing cannot simultaneously be directed at another. This sounds obvious stated plainly, and yet almost no one actually lives as though they believe it. We behave as if attention were an unlimited resource, as if we could pour hours of thought into a person who has made their indifference clear and still have just as much left over for our ambitions, our craft, our health, the people who actually deserve our presence. But that is not how finite resources work. Every hour spent replaying a conversation with someone who has already moved on is an hour permanently withdrawn from your own life. Not postponed, not recoverable later with interest. Gone, this is the real cost of chasing those who ignore you. And it's larger than the emotional sting most people assume is the whole of the injury. Deeper wound is opportunity cost. The goals not pursued, the skills not sharpened, the genuine relationships left underfed, because your finite reserve of attention was quietly being drained by someone who was never going to reciprocate. Robert Greene has written extensively about a particular kind of power that has nothing to do with dominating others and everything to do with mastering yourself. Directing your energy with such precision that nothing is wasted on what cannot be changed. What cannot be won, what was never yours to hold on to in the first place. That mastery starts exactly here, with this single decision: to stop feeding your focus to people who have shown you, unmistakably, they will not feed it back. And here's the part I want you to sit with, because it's easy to hear a phrase like, ignore those who ignore you, and mistake it for a strategy of resentment. It isn't. Revenge keeps you tethered to the very people you're trying to release yourself from. It requires their downfall, their regret, their eventual recognition of what they lost. And so it keeps your attention exactly where it's always been on them. What I'm describing tonight is not revenge, it's redirection. It's the deliberate, unemotional act of turning your face toward what actually deserves the light you have to offer. Not because you're punishing anyone, because your life is short, your capacity is limited, and every year you spend distracted by people who have already told you where you stand is a year you will never get back to spend on the people, the work, and the version of yourself that were waiting for your attention all along. This is where all 6 of these principles finally meet. Reclaim your attention as the currency it always was. Stop financing relationships that never pay you back. Let silence do the work that pleading never could. Teach people, through consistency, exactly what you will and will not accept. And beneath all of it, redirect your focus, consciously, relentlessly, toward what actually deserves it. This is not a set of tactics to deploy against people who've wronged you. It is a philosophy of living, an insistence that your finite life will not be spent waiting in doorways that we're never going to open. So I'll leave you with this. Somewhere in your life right now, there is a person, a relationship, a hope you have been quietly feeding that has given nothing back in return. You already know who it is. You knew before I finished the sentence. The question was never whether you could see it. The question is whether you're finally willing to stop paying a debt that was never yours to carry. Turn your attention toward what deserves it. Everything else, every person who couldn't be bothered to notice you, every door that never opened, every silence you mistook for a puzzle instead of an answer, let it fall away. Not with anger, with clarity. Because the moment you stop chasing what ignores you is the exact moment your real life, the one built on mutual regard and self-respect, finally begins.